This is DRF Race of the Day.
Hi everybody, Mike Beer here with Wednesday's DRF Race of the Day. We're going down to Delaware Park, race number 5 on the Wednesday, June 16th card. An allowance optional claiming event for turf sprinters. They're going to go 5 furlongs. Big field of 14 horses entered. Quick reminder before we get into it, download free Formulator past performances for this race on the Race of the Day event page at drf.com. Here's your field. 14 entered with an entry. We're not going to have a field that's that big. However, we do have 4 of these horses are also eligible. So they're going to need a scratch to get into the race. We also have 2 horses entered for main track only. The number 3, Haunted by the Music, the number 8, Harper, are 2 horses entered for main track only. We hope we don't get to see them. And let's keep this race on the turf course. Morning line favorite of the horses entered for the grass, number 7, Kingpin. He's 3-1 on the line. He's a pretty easy horse, I feel like, to make a case for in this race. Probably a deserving favorite. He doesn't really stand out in this field, but overall his form is very good. We'll touch on him a little bit later. He's a horse who is 2 for 7 sprinting on turf in his career. Does have a win off of the layoff earlier this year, and it does feel like he's probably getting a little bit of class relief in this spot. He's certainly a horse who makes a lot of sense in here. We'll run through this field in a minute here. Let's take a look first at the Timeform US pace projector, because I suppose the pace could come into play a little bit in this race. We'll see how it all plays out. I thought there were plenty of horses who could come out of there running and try and show some speed. Pace projector has one of the longer prices on the morning line, the number 9, Brooks Robinson, making the early lead in this race. He's certainly a horse who, has shown speed at times in his career. He hasn't run that often on turf. Only 3 career turf starts for this horse. He didn't win any of those horses and actually hasn't necessarily been that competitive either. He does have some speed. I don't know if he's fast enough to outrun, that many of these horses to the early lead in this spot. The number 10, Fortitude, is another horse. He's drawn outside. He does have speed. Another horse who has never actually officially won a race on the turf. He has finished first sprinting on turf before, but was disqualified. He's got some speed. The last time we saw him, he's off of a pretty long layoff in here. He was not in very good form. He does go out for a high percentage trainer. We'll see if he shows speed in this race. Certainly Kingpin, the morning line favorite, is not a horse who's slow early. They don't have him up that close to the pace on the pace projector, but I don't think he's a horse who's going to be, too far away. Chapelou, the 5, he's got speed, but he's cutting way back in distance here, so we'll see if that works out, as is the 4, the Boss Factor. So, those 2 horses who are up close on the pace projector are also 2 horses that are cutting way back in distance, so we'll see if their speed translates to the shorter race here. But it's it's one of those races where I think you want to maybe keep an open mind. And again, I'm not sitting here. I'm sitting way against the favorite in Kingpin, but I didn't feel like he necessarily had to win this race. Number 1 is Sky Magician. He's 8-1 on the line for Mike Trombetta. We'll see. This is another horse off the layoff. There are several horses coming into this race off of the layoff. He's one of them. And he's also sort of in a position where he has to prove he can still run. The first 2 times Trombetta switched this horse over to turf in his career, that was late in his 3-year-old campaign. He looked really good. He won both of those races, right up close to the pace both times. He was clear at the finish. I thought he looked good winning both of those races. He came back last year as a 4-year-old. They only got 5 starts out of him. He didn't win any of them. He never took a step forward in any of those races. He wound up racing for the claiming tag in the final 2 starts of that campaign before the layoff, and he didn't win either of those races, either beaten as the favorite at Monmouth when they dropped him in for the first time. Then they took him up to Canada at Woodbine, went a little bit longer with him. He didn't run well at all that day. Got the rest of the year off. He's off the layoff in here. Trombetta doesn't have great numbers with horses like this, but I think he's at least a horse who will probably be a fair price in this race, and you want to at least keep an open mind about him. He has run a couple of races that would make him really tough in here, and if you feel like he's going to come back off the layoff and maybe get back to one of his good races, this is a race that he could win. The number 2 is Jack the Umpire, a horse who is 0 for 4 on the grass at this point, but he has, in his defense, he's faced better company in basically all of those races. He's only sprinted on the turf once so far in his career, and in that race, the My Frenchman at Monmouth last summer, he wound up finishing ahead of your morning line favorite in this race, Kingpin. He only beat him by a head in there, but he did finish second in that race and get by Kingpin right at the end. He ran fine that day. I thought when you go back and watch the race overall, it was probably a race where even though Kingpin was defeated and wound up finishing 3rd, in a lot of ways he just ran the better race that day. He was contesting the pace all the way around the track. Jack the Umpire got outrun in there. He was last all the way to the top of the stretch, and he rallied down the outside, but he rallied into a really good setup, I thought. And I don't necessarily think he ran a better race than Kingpin did, even though he wound up getting second over that horse. There's only two turf starts since then. have just come against better horses. Don Juan Kitten, Pixelate, and a couple of stakes races out of town. And he ran fine in those races too. He's just, those horses were just too good for him. He's going to cut him back here off of a little bit of a left. He's made one start so far this year. He was nowhere in a 2-turn dirt race at Delaware Park. This is a big class drop for him. First time for a tag for Jack the Umpire. A race that, again, it could have enough pace to set up a late run from this horse once again. So maybe he's a horse you want to take a look at. Although, again, I did feel like Kingpin ran better than he did the one time that they met. The number 4 is the Boss Factor. Pace projector thinks he can be up close to the pace. We'll see if that's the case. He does not look that competitive to me. Was just claimed for $16,000 by a really good trainer, high percentage trainer, Gerald Bennett. But Gerald Bennett doesn't have great numbers off the claim with turf horses. He's going to cut this horse all the way back. I thought he was pretty hard to make in here. Chapaloo's the 5. He's a little bit interesting. This is a horse who's, a very lightly raced 4-year-old. Sprinted on turf once. Career debut as a 2-year-old. Only second best that day. Didn't run great, but he had a little bit of speed, and he did improve off of that effort. He came back for his next 2 starts, his only other 2 starts as a 2-year-old. They stretched him out. I thought he looked good breaking his maiden at Keeneland. Overall, steadied a little bit early, wound up back off the pace. That probably worked out for him because it was a race that sort of went to closers at the end. So he got the right trip after getting steadied back early in there. Came with a good finish, though. 1 clear at the end. Bounced right out of that race to win the Gray Stakes, a grade 3 up at Woodbine on the synthetic surface. Put him right on the lead that day. And he managed to hold on. Wasn't finishing strongly in there, but he managed to hold on. So, ran 2 really nice races toward the end of his 2-year-old campaign. Came back as a 3-year-old, and unfortunately for him, he only managed to get in 2 starts as a 3-year-old. One of those on dirt in the grade 3 Sam F. Davis, where he was part of a really fast-paced early, wound up finishing last far back in that field, came back for another stakes try on the turf. Sort of went a little bit of an even 5th as the favorite in the Columbia down at Tampa, and that was it. He didn't get to run again after that. 1 start so far this year, routing at Tampa in an allowance race. Again, he showed speed and tired. They're going to cut him all the way back in distance for this race. I can see that working out. This is his first start for trainer Justin Nixon. I can see this horse cutting back effectively. He's got a lot of speed, and even when you go back and watch some of the races he ran going longer, he wasn't always a strong finisher in those races. So maybe he wants a little bit of a shorter distance. We'll see if that works out for him. I thought he was interested in here. I didn't think he was the kind of horse. They have him 4-1 on the morning line. I didn't think I would take 4-1 on him. I would want a little bit more than that, but I thought he was interested in this race. The 6 is Smokin' Jay, 8-1 on the line for Kelsey Danner. This horse has only made 1 turf start so far. That was off the layoff back in April at Keeneland in the Palisades Turf Sprint. A really good field he faced that day. Obviously wasn't allowed to race on Lasix there because of the stakes conditions. So maybe that's another excuse for him. But let's take a look at the replay of that race, because he had another excuse in the race. He actually got himself into a pretty good position in this race on the turn. Dropped over towards the inside, sort of over behind the leaders on the turn. And you see there on the stretch, he's trying to come up the inside. I think it's really hard to tell how much it cost this horse. I don't necessarily know that it's you necessarily feel like he had enough horse to be really close at the end of this race. But obviously you can see there, he just didn't make it through the hole. Wound up getting stopped, and just at that point his rider, Louis Size, just sort of gave up on him and let him fall back through the field. So he's finished his last, beaten almost 20 lengths, but he didn't run that poorly. I mean, he wasn't going to get beat by that much, and as a matter of fact, he might have been in contention in a deep stretch had he gotten through that hole in the stretch. So I feel like this is a horse that you want to sort of be very forgiving of his only turf start. Other than that, his form on synthetic surfaces are fine. He doesn't seem like a horse who's maybe that good on dirt. He did run against Mandaloon in his first dirt start as a 2-year-old, and then last time at Churchill Downs, he just got really tired and didn't run well. But maybe he's just not a dirt horse. His synthetic form, good to go along with the turf race, is actually pretty good. He bounced out of that Palisades Turf Sprint in an allowance race at Arlington Park, and he won that race pretty easily. Sat off of a pretty fast pace in there, came and took it over, and was clear to the finish. I thought he ran fine in that race. So I think this is an interesting horse. 8-1 on the morning line to me feels like a fair price on him. Kingpin, we already talked about. Probably the horse to beat in here. I don't think he necessarily stands out, but this is class relief for him. They're going to take the blinkers off after his last 2 starts out of town. He's just been facing better horses. And so, he's a horse also who, as opposed to a lot of the horses in here, he's already a horse that can sprint effectively on the turf. He's got 2 wins sprinting on the grass. He won off the layoff earlier this year. His figures say he's a contender. He's got fine tactical speed. There's a lot to like about him. We'll see what kind of price you can get on him. Brooks Robinson, we touched on. He didn't look good enough to me. A horse who's, run on turf a few times. And it's been a while since they've run this horse on turf, and he just hasn't really been that effective. I didn't see him playing a major role in this race. The number 10, Fort Fortitude, another horse at 8-1 on the line, and we'll see what kind of price he is. He's a little bit interesting. He wasn't in good form the last time we saw him. All through last summer, they kept bringing him back quickly to run in races, and he just wasn't in the best form of his career at that point. He just kept getting worse, it felt like. And so maybe the layoff is actually a good thing for him. He is off of a long layoff here. You can see his overall record. He's 0 for 8 on the turf. That's at least a little bit misleading. Again, he did finish first in a turf sprint race a couple of years ago, back in September of 2019 at Colonia. He was disqualified from that win. But, all the way through, early in his career when they just didn't race him on turf that much, several speed figures he ran in his turf sprints between 5 and 5.5 furlongs, all Beyer speed figures between 84 and 94. He didn't win any of those races, but he was very competitive, and they were fast races. So this is a horse who definitely handles turf. We'll see if he comes back off the layoff in good form and ready to run, because if he does, I thought he was a player in this race. I didn't pick him, but I did throw him in there because if he winds up going off a big price, I think he may be a horse that you want to use in here. Ultimately, again, I'm not sort of way against Kingpin. Here's the picks. I put him second. I think in a lot of ways he is the horse to beat, but I didn't feel like he necessarily had to beat this field. I'm going to go back to Smoke and Jay. We looked at the replay of that Palisades turf sprint back in April, and maybe he had a real big excuse in there and was going to just run a lot better against a better field than this one. So I'm going to take a shot with him and hope that the 8-1 morning line holds up. I went 6, 7, 5, and 10 in Wednesday's DRF race of the day. It's the 5th at Delaware. Good luck.